Welcome to this week's Finance in 5, where we give you the latest on property and finance. Let's cut through the jargon, grab a coffee, let's dive in.
Yeah, right. This week we're diving into some big news for aspiring homeowners. We'll break down the latest federal budget announcements, including some tax cuts that could boost your borrowing power, a housing package that aims to address the affordability crisis. We'll also take a closer look at the widening gap between wages and property prices, and we'll explore some affordable suburbs in Perth for those with a tighter budget. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Buying Your First Home podcast, your personal guide through the Australian housing market. Here we tackle the big questions and the small details that come up when buying your first home. From financial prep to finding the right neighbourhood, we're here to ensure that you've got all the knowledge at your fingertips. So let's take the first step towards unlocking the door to your new home.
All right, so let's dive into the huge news this week. The federal budget has just been released, and there's some big changes actually for first home buyers, which specifically with the tax cuts could mean your dream of owning a home is a bit closer.
Absolutely. You know, Jaden, borrowing capacities have fallen about 30% since interest rates started rising back in May 2022. And this federal tax cut is actually going to help to sort of claw back some of that borrowing capacity. So no matter how much money you make, every taxpayer will get a tax cut from July 1st under these updated stage 3 tax cuts. I mean, the exact amount will change depending on how much you earn, but you know, everybody's going to get something from this.
Yeah, it's pretty huge. So a home buyer with, say, $100,000 income could see your borrowing capacity increase by about $25,000. Someone earning $150,000 could increase your borrowing capacity by up to $40,000. So it can make a big difference. It could be a difference between you missing out on a property and getting into the market, and just help bridge the gap there that we've seen from those rate rises.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is great for first home buyers and people looking to look for those more affordable properties as well. You know, if you're looking to buy a $2 million property, these tax cuts probably aren't going to be much of benefit to you. But for people who are just starting out, this is a huge benefit. It's a huge little extra bit of money in your pocket that can go towards the deposit for your home.
The other one that was a big change from the government is the student debt relief. So if you've got HECS or HELP, last year you would have been hit by that huge indexation. So a lot of people's balances, in some people's cases, it went up by more than what was paid off. So there's going to be debt relief backdated for anyone that had HELP, you know, HECS, as it used to be called, or VET student loans. So they're going to basically change it. So instead of getting paid 7 or 8%, it's going to go back to 3%. Going to help cut down that balance and help you pay it off a little bit quicker.
Yeah, and what's interesting with this is that it's not going to actually change your borrowing power immediately. So, you know, the amount of money that you pay off on your HECS or HELP debt is based on how much money you're earning. But what it does do is it will make it easier to pay off those student loans. So if you can go through and pay off those loans before applying to buy a house, then that really puts a big bump up on your borrowing capacity as well.
Yeah, it's one thing we do tackle. So when it's time, you don't need to worry about it now. But like Simon said, your HECS impacts your borrowing capacity not by how much you owe. So if you owe $80,000, if you owe $8,000, it doesn't impact your borrowing capacity as much as your income, because whether you have HECS or not, the bank will calculate your payments based on income. So we can get into the sort of minutia on that. If you're looking for a home now, as mortgage brokers, we can go through and give you advice on, you know, should you pay it off? This is what it means, your borrowing capacity or not. But like Simon said, in the short term, it's good news because it just means you can help chip away at that and pay it off a little bit quicker.
Absolutely. So let's just run through some key takeaways here. You know, one of the things that I think is not always obvious to people is these tax cuts, they are going to stimulate the market because people are going to have more borrowing capacity. It means that people can afford to pay a little bit more for a home. So if you are looking at potentially buying a house in the near future, it's probably a good time to move forward with that, because otherwise, in a few months' time, you'll see increased stimulation on house prices because of this extra borrowing capacity. It's kind of always one of these difficult situations. Things that go towards making houses more affordable can also bump up prices, especially if we don't have the housing supply. So this is kind of a short-term boost to your borrowing capacity, but there's probably a window of where this will actually help you to take action on buying a home as well.
Yeah, so we've talked about tax cuts that potentially boost your borrowing capacity, but what about affordability? It's obviously been a big issue that's been talked about. The budget's unveiled a $6.2 billion housing package, but I guess it's a bit of a mixed bag. They have said they're going to invest in affordable housing. So the government's trying to put money in initiatives to boost the supply of affordable housing. So there's a bit of an infrastructure boost there. So they're going to invest a further $1 billion in the states and territories to put roads and do other housing infrastructure. So we need that to unlock the supply of new housing. And I guess in some ways it's good, other ways it could put more pressure. So what are some of the negatives of this sort of package, Simon?
Yeah, it's a mixed reviews. So some people are basically saying that, this new funding for social housing is really just kind of repackaged what's already existing. And because they're offering loans instead of providing real funding, it's not as useful in terms of helping with affordability. Direct grants actually can have more impact than loans themselves. And some people are also saying that it doesn't go far enough, that doesn't go enough to address the core issues of the affordability crisis, which ultimately is based around supply and demand. I think it's also worth mentioning here that the Help to Buy scheme, which was introduced by the government last year, is actually currently being negotiated to pass through the Senate. There's some opposition here from the Coalition and the Greens. But if this does take effect, then this would also see the government help Australians into home ownership by making a contribution of up to 40% of the home's purchase price in exchange for a proportional interest in the property. So if that makes it through, that's also going to make a big difference to home buyers in the near future.
Yeah, so I think the unfortunate thing with the budget at the moment, from the lens of a first home buyer, or if you're trying to get into the market, is the focus on the infrastructure side of things. It's a long-term strategy, but it's probably what's not going to apply any immediate relief to people that are trying to find affordable homes or even affordable rentals in the short term. Some of the student housing regulations with even reduction in student visas potentially might help, put a bit more supply in the market there, and there's less renters in the short term. But it's definitely one that it doesn't look like there's going to be any sort of immediate relief coming out from this budget. There needs to be a bit more done to help reduce some of the tariffs and then the costs and the taxes for developers to make more stock, because it's really just a chronic undersupply of stock in the market.
Yeah, unfortunately, this housing crisis, housing issue hasn't just suddenly come up within 12 months. This is something that has been building up for quite a long time. So any fixes to it, unfortunately, are also likely to take quite a long time to take an effect. So I think it's actually a good thing that the government is investing on the infrastructure to allow the unlocking of future housing supply, even though it doesn't really help in the short term. I think hopefully in the future, this will go towards increasing supply and making it easier for people to get into a home.
All right, so we covered budget, its impacts on both borrowers and the broader market, but there's another gap, I guess, or another elephant in the room, and that's the gap between what we earn and what it costs to buy a home. Like, it's a tough reality. This affordability is growing and growing.
Yeah, I think this is why some people are critical of the recent government budget, because there's a huge divide that's been happening over the past 12 years or so. Home prices have grown by 93.5% in capital cities, and wages have only increased by 34.7%. So massive disparity there.
Yeah, it's been sort of exacerbated over the past 12 years. It's been sort of exacerbated by, obviously, over the last 12 years, it's been really low interest rates. It's been rapid population growth, and the bank of mum and dad phenomenon, where parents are helping either with a gift or a guarantee or with inheritance to help people into the market. So there are some big squeezes here that are making it harder, but it's not all bad news, right, Simon?
No, it's not all bad news. I mean, it can seem daunting, but there's always pathways to home ownership. There are still plenty of people who are out there finding homes to buy and achieving their goals of home ownership. So I think sometimes it's a case of looking at adjusting expectations, looking at alternative locations. These are things we've covered in other podcasts. And also the planning. The earlier you start saving and planning, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the market, considering strategies like budgeting, increasing your income, seeking professional advice. These are pretty standard things that we always recommend. There's also some other interesting ideas that are out there. There are now some options to get government grants, even if you're buying a home with a friend or a non-direct family member as part of these housing grant packages. So there are always different options. There's always ways that you can explore to still move forward in terms of the path of buying your first home. Absolutely.
Well, it does seem overwhelming. There are some opportunities, I guess, depending on where you're willing to live. And so today or this week, we're going to go through a bit of a focus at Perth. It's getting a bit of news, but there still are suburbs where there's a median house price of $350,000 or less.
Yeah, absolutely. Perth is kind of a bit of the darling of the property world at the moment, the real estate world. It is growing rapidly, but it is still one of the most affordable cities. And I thought it'd be interesting if we just take a look at some spots where you can still find homes that are under 350,000. So there are a few suburbs that are actually pretty close to the city and in good locations, and you can get a unit and a small apartment for less than 350,000. So these are suburbs like Osborne Park, West Perth, and Hamilton Hill. Great options to take a look at if you're considering living in Perth or moving to Perth.
Yeah, and they're still pretty well located, like near the CBD. There's beaches in some of them and pretty good amenities. And this is what you sort of spoke about last week. You got to look at that balance between investor and occupier. So investors have been historically drawn to these areas because of low prices and high yields. So keep an eye out for that. And I guess where you might find some value is owner occupiers tend to be sort of looking for renovated units. So you might be able to get something a little bit on the cheap if you don't mind getting your hands a little bit dirty.
Yeah, and I think one of the other benefits there is if you are buying a rental unit that is a bit of a fixer-upper and you put some work into it, you might actually be able to get a semi-decent return on your investment there to sell to owner-occupiers as you upgrade to your next place. So certainly an option to consider there.
No, it's a good one. So we've talked about Perth and we can offer some affordable options, but I guess to your point, Simon, you are, as a first-time buyer, often competing with investors in these properties. So there have been some changes, though, and some interesting news that could tilt the market back more in the favour of owner-occupiers if you're buying your first home. So WA has just introduced a ban on rent bidding. So this is a practice that it's pretty dirty. Like, I guess if you want to explain it, Simon, how they do it, and hopefully it should make it a little bit easier if you're trying to buy a home and you're trying to compete against an investor.
Yeah, so rent bidding is, I think it's a deplorable practice personally. It's basically like having an auction for the right to rent a house or an apartment. So rather than offering a place for rent at a specific price, they will say that you can rent this house or this apartment from, let's say, $500. And then when you submit your application, you actually have to tell them how much you'd be willing to pay to rent this particular property. So it's a way that they artificially inflate the rents. You know, you don't know if you're going to get your rental application accepted if you don't bump up, say, 50 or 100 above the lowest possible asking rent. So it's a pretty nasty practice from landlords and property agents, and I'm glad that it's now illegal in Western Australia.
Yeah, so landlords and agents who violate this are liable for up to a $50,000 fine. So I think it's a good win for renters and even just people in general. Like, that's pretty pathetic if you have to sort of rent bid on this. So yeah, hopefully, I guess the other win is for first home buyers, because if that's out of the window, it should hopefully won't push up the price of rental, make it more appealing for investors. So first home buyers might face less competition and even make the market a bit more predictable, because without that rent bidding, like, it means that it could be a more stable rental market for prices and make it easy for you to predict if you're, I guess, still on the rental phase and still saving, help you plan your finances. It means you're not going to have a complete blowout there on some of the costs.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wrap on this week's episode of Finance in 5. We've covered a fair bit of ground today pretty quickly, starting with the exciting news of potential tax cuts that could boost your borrowing power. Then we dove into the mixed reactions to the $6.2 billion housing package. I mean, with some of its potential benefits and some of its shortcomings in terms of addressing the immediate needs of Australians. Next, we had a look at the widening gap between wages and property prices. We had a quick look at Perth and places where you can buy a home for less than $350,000. And then finally, we just wrapped up with the glimmer of good news from Perth with the ban on rent bidding, which will level the playing field and potentially reduce competition and makes a fairer rental market.
But the journey in home ownership can be challenging, so stay positive. If you're feeling overwhelmed and you're not sure where to start, remember that you don't have to do this alone. At Hunter Galloway, we're a mortgage broker. We help home buyers all across Australia. We can help understand your situation and try and find loan options or even solutions as far as government grants and different things that are out there that can help get your foot on the ladder. So if you're ready to take a step on your home ownership journey, hit us up. We'd love to help at huntergalloway.com.au. And until next time, we'll see you guys.